So the topic for today is a term called paracentric keyways. So paracentric, it's a word that you'll probably never hear any other place. I'm not even sure if it's in my dictionary. It may be an industry-specific term. And the way that we use the term paracentric is when you study the key, just hold that. I got one right here. When you study the key, it's got milling that goes in and then back out and then back in, whatever the profile is. So I've got milling here, I got milling here, I've got milling here. Okay? Now when you look at the very tip of the key, the term paracentric refers to, think of an imaginary vertical line right down the center of the thickness of the key. The way that would you hand me that cylinder? The cylinder's a little bit easier. Yeah. It's easier to look at the broaching in the cylinder. Okay, this is great. So here's the cylinder. We're looking at the broaching in the cylinder. Okay, so let me get my bigger hammer. So the broaching in the cylinder is such that it's cut out a little bit over here, a little bit over here. And actually this cylinder is cool because imagine that an imaginary vertical line there. Okay, the face of the plug has been milled so that the key can actually go in further. The shoulder of the key, the shoulder here, will stop against the face. That's the way it's supposed to be. On this one, this is probably a Corbin 60 or whatever it is. Think of the imaginary vertical line. The term paracentric refers to how the broaching in the cylinder plug, its wards, cross over that imaginary vertical center line. So here's a great example of it, where this is the cylinder plug. It's broached over here, but this is a ward, all of this white spot, and it cuts over that imaginary vertical line. So right there is what we're referring to. So in the early days, this lock that we're looking at here, this key and this padlock, that's just a flat piece of steel. There's no wards in the broaching of the cylinder, and there's no milling on the key. And the bottom, what you need to understand, what is to be understood from the term paracentric, is how it crosses over that center line. The more paracentric a keyway is, the more resistant it is to bypass. So if you have a cylinder that is not paracentric at all, you will find it easier to stick a tool in there and manipulate the pins. Okay. So the process of picking a cylinder is where you put a tool in the face of the plug called a tension bar, and you put a small amount of rotational force on it. So the plug's trying to turn, but the pins are coming down from the top of the cylinder into the plug itself, preventing the plug from turning. When you put that rotational force on there, you can then take a tool and slowly lift those pins and figure out which pin you can lift to the point where it then gets caught on the top of the plug. And then you do the next one. And you repeat that process where you are probing and exploring, and you are literally exploiting the micro amount of difference between where, if I pulled that piece of brass off, there are going to be 5 or 6 holes drilled in there. You're exploiting the fact that those holes are not laser beam straight identical. There are imperfections in it. So people who can pick locks, of which I'm not a person who's even remotely good at, they can detect, and then they can then lift the pin, and you'll feel it move a little bit, then go to the next one, and it goes a little further. And you do that to all the pins. That's picking a cylinder with a tension rod, and then the tool, the tension, the tension bar, and then your pick. In a cylinder like this, where there is no paracentric nature to it, it's easier to get your tool in there and manipulate.
One line.
It's just it's completely wide open here. Imagine if that ward and that ward weren't there, you'd have an easier time getting your tool in there. But when you have a paracentric keyway, like the one that's here, or a highly paracentric keyway that would be extremely cut, you'd find a darn time trying to get a tool in there to pick it. It's the keyway itself, the way that the plug is broached and the key is milled are literally the keyway. So Schlage has many keyways, Sargent has many keyways, they're all different. This keyway won't fit into its sister keyway. It's meant to be that way, unless it's intended not to. But for this conversation, it's meant to be that way. The point is that we've talked previously about keyways. Your house key won't fit in your car. It's because they're a different keyway. But now we're talking about the paracentric nature of different keyways. And the entire point is all the science of how paracentric a keyway is, how far it goes across that center line gives it its paracentric nature. Okay, it is literally a nature of keyways to be highly paracentric, and that is considered a higher level of security. So I'm going to see if I can find real quick an example of a highly paracentric keyway. If not, I'll just do a generic Google search. Because I want you to see a highly paracentric keyway. Keyways had gotten so highly paracentric, especially by Best, that people found it difficult to actually get the key in, to actually get it to go in, because of how highly paracentric it was. So, highly paracentric keyway. That is misspelled. Doesn't matter. Paracentric keyways. Yeah, this is great. This is really good. Okay. So, if you were to search highly paracentric keyway, you will find examples of this. So what we're seeing here is, in this, whoever this example is, where's the vertical center line? It's like here. This huge ward that's here. Man, if you try to stick a tool in here to lift that pin, even the entry of the tool itself likely is overlifting the pin so you can't pick it. And they will intentionally make highly paracentric keyways to thwart picking. It's the classic thing, like I've said in the past. That could be what we're dealing with right here.
Just top a little bit more curved.
Well, not only curved, but paracentric refers to that imaginary vertical center line. The wards in the keyway are substantially crossing over an imaginary center line. I mean, they go way over. So when you reduce the clear space in the broaching of the plug by having wards cross over that imaginary vertical center line, you're thwarting the ability to pick the cylinder. Let's see if we can find one. Yeah, I mean, these wards encroach into the center line, not as grossly, not as substantially as this one does. I mean, that blocks it. This would be a very interesting key to look at.
Yeah.
It's, shaped really strange.
You say like the paracentric, it shows on how far it crosses over the vertical line, but would it be also saying over the line but depth as well? They can do that? Say,
Like how far you insert it into the plug?
yes, the thickness of the key. Say if it wasn't, say it was skinnier in the front and then gets wider at the end.
I've never seen that.
Just
but
because there's that paracentric is over the vertical line, say on the right side, but it's giving it a little depth into it still. I mean, it still goes over the line.
the evolution of keyways is far from over, that's for sure.
Okay.
And it's
No,
really,
different ways to think about it.
many times I've said to myself after reading a lot of locksmithing books, I've said, once you really understand everything that's already been done, you can say to yourself, how can I improve it based on what's already existed? So that one's also paracentric as well. That would be really hard to get a tool in there because it's so curved at the top.
Okay.
You know, you can't get a tool in there very easily. That one's not. This is no big deal. I'm not. Whoever this is, whoever it is. Yeah, look at this. Look at this one with all these weird cuts. You got that ward sticking in. You know, so what's the space that you have to work in? It's just this. If you're going to stick a lockpick in there, you've got such a small amount of room to lift because you're blocked. You get up over here, you're probably lifting the pins too far, and you won't be able to pick it open. Let's see. The best help paracentric cylinder Folger atom. Let's look. Yeah. Okay, so these guys, Southern Steel or Southern Folger. Yeah, okay. This is a mogul cylinder, a highly paracentric key, and you'll certainly know when you're onto a piece of security equipment when it's only used in prisons. Okay, so they're literally telling you that this is a paracentric application, and because people in jails will try to pick locks open. I'm sure of it. Southern Folger paracentric key blank. Yeah, okay. So these guys are going to use really specialty blanks. Let's not focus on that. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Best. Maybe they've got a picture of it. Kind of. They're showing the face of the cylinder plug. This is really sticking out over there. So the importance of talking about paracentric and crossing the vertical center line, it actually defines the keyway. So a keyway is, what's the difference between two different key blanks? Well, it's the keyway is different. How is the keyway different? It's the paracentric nature. It's not only the placement of where the wards are in the broaching of the cylinder plug, but it's also how paracentric it is. To what degree do the wards cross over that imaginary vertical center line? And paracentricity, if that's even a word, is used as a means by which to help thwart lockpicking. Yeah, see right here, vertical center line. This is a good example. This might be something Corbin. I'm really not sure what that is. It could be an older Corbin, but this is what they're defining. This is highly paracentric. With all those little wards that look like teeth, highly, and that's the one that we were just looking at. I was hoping to. That best.
There's that best up there. That's very
Yeah. That's it exactly. That's the one. That's what I wanted to show you. Similar to what we were looking at earlier, in the sense that you've got a huge ward cutting over the vertical center line, and then that exact system, people that use it complain it's hard to get the key in there because you know how you put a key in there and sometimes you just tip it down and then it goes in. No one ever thinks about it. That is so paracentric that this whole massive ward here, that key's got to probably go straight in. You can't kind of do this and then in, So that's going to be a lot harder to pick for most individuals because of the highly paracentric nature of the keyway. Now keep in mind, when it comes to bypassing cylinders, there are people in the world that doesn't thwart them. They can get in. I've seen videos, I've heard stories. How much of it's true, who knows? But I have, there are people that are truly gifted at lockpicking. But a more paracentric keyway is meant to thwart picking. Picking is a means of bypass. Bypass just means you get the lock open without the key. It's a means of bypass. What's another means of bypass? My sledgehammer. You know what I mean? Destructive bypass. So how you get how you get the cylinder open or the lock open without the key is a means of bypass. Picking it open is non-destructive because you're leaving a forensic level of evidence that you've done it, because people with forensic training can take the lock apart and see that it was manipulated. But the paracentric nature of keyways is part and parcel of what they are. So if you had a bucket full of 100 keys and they were all 100 different, all of them will be different in how paracentric they are. And that a highly paracentric key is a hallmark of higher security key systems. Whether it be Yale has KeyMark, Medico has their own system, and those keyways are really paracentric because the knowledge on how to pick locks is a searchable term on any search engine. And people have, the point is that people have access to the knowledge of how to non-destructively bypass cylinders. Being able to do it is another thing. Being able to understand how it's done. I just described to you how to pick a cylinder. Give me one? Well, I hope you're not in a hurry, because I may never get it open, because I can't detect and exploit the differences in how those holes are cut. But Anna's much better at it. Go figure, right? A more highly paracentric keyway works to thwart non-destructive bypass, or just picking a cylinder open is really what it is. There's also on this page key anatomy, which I wanted to go over, and then the next week we're going to talk about key blanks and how to work on identifying them. After that, we're actually going to have you cut keys manually on a key duplicator?
I have done cut keys.
Okay, not on a punch. Have you cut them this way?
Not that way, just the blue.
That'll be the next thing we do. The blue punch is okay, that's fun, but that doesn't require as much. We're going to get my key machine out in a couple of weeks. So, key anatomy is similar to what we were talking about earlier on the bit keys, in that every part of the key has a name for it. So, this is not a stop. I don't know what I'm doing here.
The bow.
Yeah, well, this is definitely the bow of the key. That's right, the head, but the bow of the key. So the stop is this key. Could be a padlock key. This could be a master or an ABIS padlock key. Right here is the shoulder. It's the stop. Generally, like this key has a shoulder, a stop on both the top and the bottom, which is right here.
Would you count it as the first stop or the
No,
second stop?
up here, this one.
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to say that that's not a stop because they don't look like they're in line with each other. No. That's the stop, so that when you push it into the cylinder, it will stop against that shoulder, because that's really important. This one doesn't even have any feature on the bottom. That's your stop. It's called a shoulder stop. Interchangeable cores, small format, have a tip stop. They stop when the key goes all the way into the cylinder and then it hits right here. It'll stop right there. They don't have a shoulder here at all. They stop when the key has entered the cylinder and then bottom out. So it doesn't so much matter, but there's always a stop on the key. If you recall our bit and barrel keys, that bit key had like a shoulder on it so that it could go into the lock case and hit the lock case and it would stop right there. Barrel keys that would go over the post, it's not important that you really remember this. I barely remember it. It goes over the post and will stop when the post hits the back of the key, or the front of the key hits the back of the lock case. Something is stopping it. So in pin tumbler cylinders, you will have a stop. This one, or in a wafer tumbler as well, this has a shoulder stop. So we've got the bow, we've got the shoulder stop. The shoulder stop is really important because it's from the shoulder stop that the stop to the vertical, to the center line of the first cut is a dimension. Every key system, from here to the center of that cut is a specific value. This is 0.233, whatever the number is, doesn't matter. The next dimension is the center of the first cut to the center of the second cut. That is a number. That could be 0.18. The dimension from the second to the third will be the same value, 0.18, 0.18, 0.18. The point is where the shoulder stop is extremely important because the dimensional relationship between where the key stops and where that first cut center line is located is directly related to the face of the cylinder, or where the key stops, and that first vertical
pin.
Yep, exactly. So the shoulder stop or the tip stop is crucial because it positions the key where it needs to be positioned. So if you cut this in the wrong dimension, the pin won't seat. It'll come down a little or none at all, but it won't turn because the pin's not seated correctly because that cut's in the wrong location. It's like if you took a Schlage key and you cut it to a quickset pattern, the cuts would be there, but the key wouldn't work. You're like, oh, the depths are good, but they're spaced at the wrong place.
Okay.
The shoulder stop is what we gauge off of. So when you check it out, when you use your blue punch, you release your handle, lift the jaw. What do you do then? You slide the key in until what? It stops. And it's stopping on the shoulder stop. So that jaw, where the punch comes down and then it moves over one click, the over one click is the machine is an absolute Schlage only machine because the center to center of each cut is absolutely Schlage only. You could cut another key on there if you really wanted to, but they will not be in the right place. All you're doing is ruining a key and ruining a machine. So when you slide that in the blue punch, it stops on the shoulder, whether or not you realized it. And then that first cut is good, and then when it ratchets over, that machine, if you wanted to cut quickset, I'd have to give you a different machine because its spacing is different, and its dimension from the shoulder stop is different to the first cut. So it's stop to the first cut, and then the center to center of each cut. And that's what the shoulder governs. It says, okay, I'm in the home position. Like if you've had because I have a little bit of experience with them, a CNC machine. A CNC machine will operate in the X, Y, and Z axis. It'll take a router and move it through 3D space. But before you cut something on a 3D printer, you have to home it. Home is 0, 0, 0. Then it says, I know where I am, and you're telling me go this far this way, go this far this way. That's how it knows home. Home on this key is the shoulder stop. That's home. Okay, so the tip of the key is pretty obvious. That's just the tip of the key. The blade, that is the part of the key from the shoulder, from the stop all the way down to the end. If there is no stop, it's just the part that would otherwise go in the plug, is the way that I would define it. After that, you've got the depth of the cut. You cut a bunch of keys that were different numbers, whatever the depth is. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are depths in a Schlage system, in a two-step Schlage, a two-step 10-depth system, 0 through 9 for Schlage. If you were to measure, so when you cut a 3 cut in a key, a 3 is the depth, how deep it is, but the way that depths are actually considered on, the way that depths are looked at on a chart is actually the root depth. The root depth is important. The root is from the bottom of the blade to the bottom of the cut. That dimension. When you cut a 3 on the machine, it's removing 3 from up here. But I can't, on a cut key, I need to measure what the cut is. I can't measure from what's been cut away to the bottom of that. But I can measure the bottom of the blade to the bottom of the cut with my caliper.
And then take the subtract off.
Yes, you're onto it. You don't realize it yet, but you are. There is an effective plug diameter. That is, in Schlage, it's 0.5 inch. It's a half inch. It's the effective plug diameter. So if you took the length of theoretically, nominally, not if you put a tape measure on it, but it'll be very close. If you took 0.5 inch, subtracted the length of a 3-pin, you would have the root depth. So if you know the root depth and you know the effective plug diameter, you can then figure out what pin it is. So if someone comes in to you and says, hey man, I need you to pin a cylinder for me, but I don't know what the cuts are. Well, what you could do is get your pin kit out and start dropping pins in there until something was flush, and then looking at it and saying, oh, okay, well, that's a 3. Or you could say, oh, this is Schlage. Let me pull up the chart. It'll tell you it's a 0.5 effective diameter. You could get your caliper out and measure that root depth, and you'll take 0.5 minus the root depth. That's your pin. The point of the matter is, here's why that's important. If you have a caliper and someone walks into you with this key and you have a blank key with your caliper, you should be able to take your file and your vise, not you should, but in theory, file that key, because you can measure the shoulder to the first cut, each successive cut on your caliper, then the root to the bottom of the cut for each of the cuts. And you can write all that down, and then you can start filing. And once you believe you have it, you take your caliper and test your key. You measure your key. And there are locksmiths that do that. I know one guy back up in Illinois, he says it would take me about an hour to do it. But when you have a lock that you can't drill into, let's say you've got a 100-year-old safe, you can't destroy the hardware. It's irreplaceable. You're going to spend that hour to make the key. Mm-hmm. And the way that these guys are doing it, you could also, well, if you had some piece of metal, you would be able to, in theory, create a key and then file or cut all of those spaces, all of those cuts to the proper spacing and the proper depth. So what's not on there is the root depth, the bottom of here to the bottom of each of these cuts. So that then leads us to the idea that there is a depth and spacing chart for every manufacturer. So when you look at the anatomy of a key, a depth and spacing chart, I'm going to show you one right now since we're talking about it, because there's not too much anatomy left. I mean, you've got the peak of the key, which is obviously the peak. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's nothing special about that. You've got the depth or the cut of the key. Root, this is the root of the key. The root depth is this. The cut depth is this. The effective plug diameter is the half inch that goes around this. Shoulder stop. You've got your millings. The paracentric nature of the keyway. There's nothing else on this in the tip, in the bow. So let me show you some depth and spacing data. Let's go to Schlage. And let's go to Everest. This chart, this is a Schlage Everest. This is their S family. Doesn't matter what the keyway is, it just truly doesn't matter. Once you know those dimensions, in theory, one could take a blank and file a key. If you have the blank in a file, you could make a key. You'll note, so shoulder to the first cut is 0.231. If we took the third cut and subtracted this, it's about 0.14, whatever it is. This minus this is about 0.14. This minus this is about 0.14. This minus this, meaning the center to center is the same dimension. So if I did the math, this minus this, 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 it's the same value. So once you know the first cut, and you know the center to center of the first two cuts, you then know the center of all cuts. And that's depth and spacing. Then, so that's spacing. Now what about depth? Here we go, I think. Ah, here we go. Cool. So, in the manufacturer's own data, they don't give you the length of the pin that goes in there, because that's not important. The root depth is what's important. Now, you've cut 32322. Do you recall what is a deeper cut, 3 or 2?
3.
Okay, and you're right. 3 is a deeper cut. When you look at the root depth between 3 and 2, what is a deeper value? What is a larger value?
That is...
What number's bigger?
2.
3 or 2?
3 is bigger than 2, but in decimal, would it be the 2 bigger than 3?
The 2 is bigger than the 3 in the root depth because it's a larger number. 0.29 is smaller than 0.305. 0.3 is bigger than 0.29. 0.29, 20, no, however you want to think of it. 0.29 is smaller than 0.3, but we just said 3 is a deeper cut. It's a bigger pin. True, because that's the root depth. So it's
okay.
It's so as your pin gets longer, your root depth gets smaller. 9 is the deepest cut in a Schlage system. When you cut a 9 out of here, that root, what's left, is a smaller number.
Okay, I see now. That 3 would have to have a smaller pin to it. The 2...
Work it out.
Well, based off that, it goes from bigger to smaller.
What in terms of root depths? So a 0 is a really small pin in Schlage. It's the smallest pin. If you're going to cut a key for a 0, you're only cutting away a little bit. How much is left below the cut? That is a larger number because you've cut away less of the key. So if let's say that's a 0 and that's a 5, there's more underneath here left over than there is over here. So therefore this on the root depth needs to be a larger number. 0.335 is bigger than 0.26.
And that's going, so root depth from the bottom of the blade to the bottom of the first cut, which would be bare.
Precisely. The root depth is the bottom where my finger is and the bottom of the cut. If I put my caliper in there, I can measure from here down to here. But what I can't measure is how deep that cut is. Because I can't. What am I going to put my caliper on? How am I going to measure that? But I can measure this. The caliper is absolutely a tool that if you're not using a couple of times a week, you learn to use this tool and you love life. So let's check it out. This first cut, I can get my caliper in there. 0.26. Let's go to the second cut, which we can see is deeper. 0.194. 0.26. So a shallower cut has a greater root depth. A deeper cut has a smaller root depth. And we just proved it. Whatever that was, 0.26, whatever I said. 0.255, I'm holding it a little crooked. And 0.185. So this is 80 thousandths of an inch deeper than the other cut. This sucker is how you would measure that. And indeed, customers have come in and so they'll come in with something that I don't have memorized, like Corbin. And I can pull up a Corbin depth and spacing data, and I can measure that root, and then I can translate that into what the cut is, because I'll know the effective plug diameter, which I don't see here anywhere actually. It has to be here, the effective plug diameter. You need to know what the dimension is. Yeah, I don't see it listed here. It might say it on this code card, the C45 code card. It ought to. But once you know the effective plug diameter and you can measure the root, you can figure out the pin. At the same time, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take my pin kit and I'm going to start dropping pins until I'm like, oh, that's nice and flush. That's flush. That's how I would go about doing that. But there are instances when a manufacturer publishes data about their keying system, this is how they give it to you: depth and spacing. Depth and spacing. That tells you everything. Then you add the keyway and the paracentric nature of the keyway. Paracentric is just a component. It's a distinguishing feature of the keyway. A more paracentric keyway, the more resistant it is to non-destructive bypass, picking it. But now we're talking about the DNA of a key itself. That's defined the terms. That's talking about paracentric. We've taken it a step further in defining the terms to show how those terms are actually used in application. And then one step further to say cut depth, root depth. So we defined root depth by talking about the length of the pin and how we can't measure the length of the pin. If you have a pin here, you can measure it. You can get it in your tweezers and measure it. But measuring this is easier because I've got something I can hold. I've got a tool I can hold, and I can get in there and measure that.
Because then if you measure the pin, you would have to kind of like try this one, try this one, try this. Same thing as just trying each pin until you go find.
And there's nothing. That doesn't take any skill.
No.
It doesn't take any knowledge or experience or learning the hard way. This is how locksmiths make a living. The knowledge of what the key system is. Any fool can load pins in a tumbler. But understanding the science of of why you're doing it that way. So to teach you how to repin a cylinder, I'm not going to give you all the science. You're going to become proficient at combinating cylinders, and then we're going to talk about, do you know why you do it the way you do it? You know why a 3 is a 3? I don't care about the 3. It's like from physics in high school. Every action has an equal but opposite reaction. It's really the reaction that we're concerned with. The reaction is the initial, what you see, what you can observe. That's not why it happens. Something made that opposite reaction happen. The root depth is where it's all coming from. You're loading a 3-pin because of your root depth. So it's any fool can load pins in a cylinder.
And eventually get it, but this is something when you can deal with any kind of different variations and find out what key it is and either duplicate it or make another one for anything.
It's very insightful what you said, because as I think I've said in the past, I don't want to teach you how to key Schlage. I want to teach you the science of locksmithing so you can apply that science to any manufacturer. What's the root depth? All you care about is root depth. I got it. What system am I working in? Is it Ford or Chevy? Is it Chrysler or 20,000 other vehicles? You don't care. A starter's a starter's a starter in a car, right? But you got to know the rules of that system. Schlage, Arrow, Kwikset, scores of other people. Once you understand how it works, you then just plug in their variables. It's that biblical thing, you teach a man you give a man a fish, one thing. You teach him how to fish, this is the teaching how to fish. You can literally approach anyone's system and understand the anatomy of their key now by seeing that. HPC is a manufacturer of locksmithing tools. They have dozens of pages of published depth and spacing data, and it's not graphical like this. It's just shoulder to first, center to center, depths, root depth. And once you have that data, someone could Corbin has
it is past 4.
Yeah, no, we're out of here. Corbin has dozens of keyways. I could hand you a Corbin and be like, how am I going to figure this out? But if you have the depth and spacing data, you can, with a caliper, figure it out. Because you got System 70 and Pre-System 70 in Corbin 60. How do I know which one it is? You got a caliper and a key and that chart, boom, you will figure it out. Because it will be that or it will not be that. Now, the only time that it's not is when the key is worn a little bit. But then you study the relationship between the different cuts, and it will either fit or it won't. That's more advanced. but which, you know, so understanding these terms liberates you to the point where you can now go out and say, okay, well, I don't know the answer, but I'll give it a try. I have an idea of the science behind it. I'll try it. That's all it really is. We're going to talk about key blanks in the next week. I'm going to show you a document, a catalog that will allow you to really appreciate how many different keyways there are. Hundreds, if not thousands. What questions do you have?
This is just more on profiling the key, understanding what system it goes to, how to. No question, just more about kind of overview.
Yeah, just you saying a summary of what we've talked about. Yeah.
Shoulder stop, from the shoulder to the first key cut. That is very crucial, and from center to center. The root depth, that is mainly important to figure out one thing, which system belongs to.
And also what you see on there, the 100 degree and the .031, the way that the V is cut on a key is absolutely specific to that system. So if I took a cutter and I cut, so when you punch that Schlag, if you weren't punching the right degree, the pin won't fit. It'll come down, but it won't seat properly. The degree of that cut and how wide that flat is at the bottom, absolutely genetic code. You can't cut a Corbin on a Schlag key because it'll have a different requirement. Well, we get into cutting keys in a couple of weeks. I'm going to show you the cutter, and I'm going to show you different cutters, and you'll say, oh yeah, that angle is different. That angle is different. That's because that's how that manufacturer created their system. And if you're cutting keys using tools that are not giving you how it was engineered and designed for, it ain't going to work. They have to give you that. So they're telling you on a HPC 1200CM, you're going to use this code card, and it's going to tell you that you have to have a CW14MC wheel, because that wheel matches this. It'll give you this when you cut it.
Okay.
And I'll show you what that code card is. We're going to pull my Blitz machine out, which you've not seen yet. You've walked past it 1,000 times. But we're going to actually use a Blitz machine. Well, we'll use the Rytan in a couple of weeks, then we'll go to the Blitz.
Okay. No questions.
There's nothing else.
Yeah.
We hit it on the head.
Yeah. Makes it clear.
Yeah. I do want to say the book that we're using as our outline, if I've not already mentioned it, Chris Chase, when he wrote this, he was a certified registered locksmith. He is a instructor that I have had, that Terry has had, that Anna has had. This is his textbook, and we're just using it as a means by which to go through this. So all credit goes to him for this book. Eventually, you'll likely sit in this class, the Fundamentals of Locksmithing, and it will allow you to go over this all in extreme detail. Although we're kind of going over it forensically, but this is his textbook. There's no doubt. Cool. All right, my man.
Perfect. Thank you.
We did it.
All right. No, that was very good. I appreciated it.
As do